Thank you for watching this program brought to you by the Orthochat. Before we begin, please take some time to hear some information about our sponsors. Here at the Orthochat, we are proud to be an official partner of Lore Coffee Roasters, an Orthodox Christian coffee company out of Bonners Ferry, Idaho. If you visit their website at www.lorecoffeeroasters.com/theorthochat, we will receive 15% of your order. It's an Orthodox Christian coffee company that is organically sourcing a great variety of flavors. I drink it myself and I love coffee. And as a coffee connoisseur, I could tell you it's top notch. So visit their website at www.lorecoffeeroasters.com/theorthochat for 15% of your purchase to be contributed to our project. Here at the Orthochat, we are proud to be a partner of Scriptorum Press, a Christian publishing company that puts out great books about the lives of the saints, their teachings, and a variety of other Christian topics. My personal favorite in their collection is The Life of St. Dionysius the Areopagite. If you visit their website at scriptorumpress.ca and use the code ORTHOCHAT at checkout, you will receive 15% off of your order, and I encourage you all to check it out to pick up some great patristic and theological teachings, as well as hagiographies, to spiritually enrich you and help support the Orthochat and another great Christian company. We here at the Orthochat are proud to be a partner of the St. Maximus Society, run by Archimandrite Maximus Waymar and his collective. They put out great videos talking about the spiritual life, theology, and a variety of other Orthodox Christian topics. If you check out the link below this video, you could find their YouTube channel, and it's currently a growing project, and I implore you all to visit their site so that you can help support them and a great cause for the Orthodox Christian Church. Here at the Orthochat, we support the special needs, differently abled, and their families. That's why we are a proud sponsor of TP Splash Guard, a urinary assistance device for those who need some help during bathroom time. All you need to do is remove the holding seal with instructions on the front, open it up, remove the adhesive to attach it to the front of the toilet, and now it's easier in the restroom. If you would like to learn more about this revolutionary device for special needs and differently abled people, visit tpsplash.com. That's tpsplash.com to learn more and inquire about making a purchase. All statements and opinions expressed by guests of this podcast are not representative of the Orthochat, its host, or its producers, and should not be associated with the podcast unless explicitly stated by the host.
You are listening to the Orthochat by Yanni Katsadas.
Kyrie Christe eleison, 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 Kyrie Christe eleison.
Greetings in Christ, brothers and sisters. Welcome to episode 81 of the Orthochat. We are here today with Father Emmanuel Lemelson. Padre, how you doing?
Thank God, all is well. I'm so happy to join your show, Yanni.
It's a joy to have you. Father, would you like to start us off with a prayer?
Absolutely. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. Almighty God, our help and refuge, fountain of wisdom and tower of strength, who knows that we can do nothing without thy guidance and help. Assist us, we pray thee, and direct us to divine wisdom and power, that we may accomplish this task, and whatever we may undertake to do, faithfully and diligently, according to thy will, so that it may be profitable to ourselves and to others, and to the glory of thy holy name. For thine is the kingdom and the power and the glory of the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit, now and forever, and to the ages of ages. Amen.
Amen. Father, before we get started, what's the word? What's new?
Well, I'm wishing I was on a beautiful Greek island like you, brother.
Well, it's only beautiful in
We got
portions. I
beautiful
mean,
fall foliage here in Vermont, but come on, look at where you're living.
well, well, at least Vermont doesn't have goats eating your clothes while you're trying to hang them out to dry outside. But
True. We do have some sheep locally, though. St. Catherine's Chapel is not too far from the Von Trapp family
ah,
setup. The Von Trapps were the family from The Sound of Music. If you remember that Disney film, but you're too young for that, but you can look it up. In the 70s, it was the late 70s, I believe. The Sound of Music came out. It was a true story about this family that escaped the Nazis from Austria. Well, they actually came to Stowe, Vermont to settle, and they have this magnificent, like 500-acre piece of land where they have a hotel and everything, and they have a farm, and they actually have sheep there and cows. There's cows everywhere in Stowe, so it's very rural, but that's what the setting is like around St. Catherine's Chapel here in Stowe, Vermont. So yeah, we don't have goats, but we got sheep. The bottom line.
well, you know what? That's wonderful. A little bit of wildlife never hurt. Well, I mean, sometimes it does, but we don't talk about that. So
They're eating your clothes.
yeah, right. Father, take me back to the very beginning. Tell me about, your young life. What about it made you care about God and the Orthodox Church, and pretty much what everything was like when you were younger?
All right, wow, that's a big question. If I get carried away, just stop me, all right? Or if I start boring you or something like that. But um, I was born in Arizona. My mother is Cretan, so she grew up in the island of Crete. Her uncle was the Archbishop of Crete, actually.
No
Archbishop
kidding.
Psalidakis. And my father was American of Germanic descent, Austrian, German. And I was baptized in the Orthodox Church as a young child. And both my parents deserve a lot of credit for that. Even though my father is not really a Christian, he ensured that we were baptized to his credit. But we didn't really attend church very often, actually, very rarely growing up. So I only had a few faint memories of the church in my mind. And I had a pretty adventurous youth, almost like a contemporary, like a Huckleberry Finn or something. And when I was about 6, we began to go to Greece, and we'd stay for extended periods of time. So it was really a trip, if you will, for a 6-year-old to go between these two completely different cultures. And when I was young, Yanni, I'm a dinosaur, so I'm not a young guy like you. But back in those days in Greece, it was completely different. There's no Kentucky Fried Chicken and like McDonald's and stuff like that,
Oh,
Starbucks.
yeah.
I mean, like, uh, like I tell my mom, like, I just want a hot dog, and I get like canica. I'm like, well, this isn't a hot dog, and so it was really an incredible experience, but very, very different. We had like 2 TV channels, and they'd be on for like a couple hours a day. But it was a blessing because I got to see a Greece, I think, that is completely extinct now. And so, anyways, we'd go back and forth between America and Greece. And of course, you can't walk 50 feet in Greece without bumping into a church or a chapel or something like that. So even though, I wasn't really being raised in the church, I had a very faithful mother who was prayerful. Christ was in her heart all the time. But she was in this marriage, with my father, who was not inclined to live a life in Christ. And but then I was living in a country with 2,000 years of orthodoxy, and it's in the people's blood, it's in their DNA, right? It's in the land, it's in everything. And it wasn't until I was about 18 that I just had an overwhelming calling to be a priest, and it was quite intense. So I went from, we can say, almost a completely secular way of life as a full-blooded, healthy young man with a number of things on my mind, but not the church. Use your imagination. And then just this tremendous calling, this really almost like a knowledge, a foresight, I don't know what to call it, that pronia, we could say in Greece, like this sort of providential calling that I was going to be a priest. And I don't know, I wasn't sure how I felt about it at the time, but it was like a change of life, like a 180. And I was like, well, I'm going to start going back to church and
Was
start
it
attending
this
the
like
holy
singular?
services.
Was it this like singular intense moment, or did it kind of like
Yeah,
branch?
it was.
Wow.
It really was. Yeah, it was. I just woke up. If you want to know the details, I'll just tell you. I just woke up one morning and, well, I'll give you a little background first. So I had left home pretty early, and I had went and studied in Germany. And it was the only thing I enjoyed in school was foreign languages. Other than that, I was a terrible student through high school. And So one of my German teachers said, well, you have quite an aptitude for languages. Why don't you go overseas and study? And I took her up on that. And when I came back, I left high school a year early. I graduated a year early and went to a university. And when I went to that university, I met my mentor, who was a brilliant man. But believe it or not, he was Catholic. He was actually a Jesuit. But when I was sitting in his class for the first time, I'm listening to this guy. I'm like, wait, his New Testament Greek is like perfect. And like I really prided myself on my German, and which I knew was also, quite good. And I was like, wow, he's speaking German. Like, who's this guy? He's got a collar on. And for the first time, I think in 17 years, I was 17 when I entered the university. Um, I felt I could use my mind. And then I realized that up until that point, I was probably a completely worthless student because I was actually quite bored in class. And I would go through my classes thinking that, other students were seeing or knowing the things that the teacher was talking about, the answers and so on, but just weren't saying them. And then in retrospect, some years later, I began to realize that not everyone knew or saw the things that I was knowing or seeing. But so I'm in front of this guy who's got probably like a 175 IQ, the most beautifully formed mind you can imagine. And he's teaching philosophy, and he's teaching reason, and he's teaching all these things that for the first time, my mind is just expanding exponentially. And I just couldn't get enough of it. And I think what that did, Yanni, is it gave me enough pause um, to open my heart up, to open a door, let's say, to my heart. I don't want to sound sentimental. I was anything but sentimental, certainly then, for God to work. And it's just the way God had it happen. I don't know how to explain it. And there was actually a moment there where there was a fleeting thought about maybe becoming Catholic. I don't know. I probably crossed my mind, and he actually invited me to go and go to some of the Jesuit meetings and so forth like that. But I just remember distinctly remembering that, yeah, there's a reason I was born into the Orthodox Church, and the memory of the beauty and the icons and the incense, and you can't really change who you are, right? You can't change your family. And we as Orthodox Christians, we're part of a spiritual family. And even though I probably couldn't have articulated it then in those terms, I knew it instinctively. But anyways, that was what set the groundwork for this experience, where eventually I had, some very powerful dreams and three very powerful dreams. And one day I just woke up and I had an overwhelming experience of God's love and calling. And yeah, I could go into more detail if you want, but that's
I mean,
just
yeah, of course. I mean, well, mine was like, I just got into a huge fight with my parents when I was 19 about what I want to do with my life. And then, I remember just in the moment of it when I was like 14, I just told them I want to go be a priest. And they were like,
wow,
you
14.
know, they were just like, where did that come from? I was like, I got my blessing from my spiritual father when I was 14. I first wanted to do it when I was around like 9, but, I kind of like whisked it away in my own head when I was in high school, and then it just kind of like came out of me like I just vomited out of my system, and I felt so much better when I told them. And then a whole bunch of spiritually like crazy stuff started happening, but that
Yeah.
that's usually how it goes, so to speak.
Yeah, that's amazing that you had that knowledge at such a young age. It's a blessing to know what you want to do. I often think the people who are the greatest at what they do, whatever it is, musicians or physicists, they have a calling very early to do, what they're called to do with their vocation. It's certainly true of a religious way of life, or to be called to the holy priesthood, which is a vocation in many ways, like other vocations, but of course, obviously, it's also quite distinct.
Yeah.
But anyway, I began to return to go to the Orthodox church there in Seattle, which was St. Demetrius. And there was a very pious priest there named Father John Angelus, and he was also a very educated man and a Harvard graduate. And we began to we'd have vespers every Saturday together, and it would just be him and I normally. And I couldn't chant; I'd mostly just read the parts that the cantor normally would. And he was very humble, and we would talk, and um, eventually he would help with my transition to Holy Cross once I finished my bachelor's in theology and religious studies.
So what was
So,
seminary like for you? What was that experience like?
in hindsight, really quite beautiful. I really began to enjoy my undergraduate study. I actually had left school for a year at one point. I actually went back to Greece as an undergraduate. I came back, changed my major to theology and religious studies. Actually became quite a good student at that point, And my theology and religious studies major at Salem University, that was my primary. My secondary major was in German. And right before I got my second major in German, they actually discontinued that major. There wasn't enough students to do it. But there was only like 6 students. Of course, it's a Catholic university, and the other 5 are women, so they're never going to be ordained. They're never going to serve the church in any official capacity. This was, we're talking like over 25 years ago, 26, 27 years ago, 28 years ago. It's really the beginning, right, of this sort of extreme left woke ideology permeating the world and our culture that, now it's gotten so out of hand, it's gone off the rails completely. But it was already beginning. The theology courses were all at the university. There was already about, sort of, we could say the early stages of gender studies, if you will, and feminism. I'm just going to call it toxic feminism because that's what it is. I think it's so destructive to the family. And anyways, I finally graduate, and it's a great feeling. I was the first person in my family to graduate from college, and actually even finish college. I have one sibling who did 1 year of college, but it was quite a good feeling. And then I went to the seminary. And I had to give up sort of everything I was doing. I was always working as a student. I always worked very long hours. And when I went to initially when I went to visit the seminary a year earlier, they were quite welcome. They said, "Well, just come. We'll give you a scholarship, and when you enter the Master's of Divinity program." And then when I came a year later, they said, "Well, we don't really have that scholarship for you anymore." I never really understood. There were 4 guys that entered the year I entered, because it was a year following the deposition of the archbishop, the then archbishop. So he'd been deposed. There was a lot of tumult in the institutional church.
Right.
And the other 3 guys, in hindsight, were Greek. And my last name is not exactly Greek, you might have noticed. So even though I'd lived in Greece and I spoke Greek and I love the Greek language and all that, yada, 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 I often wonder in hindsight if maybe that affected my financial aid. But anyways, that was a minor detail. And so I continued working. I mean, I had a lot of financial obligations, not just for my own education, but also for my family. I tried to help out my family and so forth. And so I would be working crazy hours, like 50, 60 hours a week while I was in seminary. And but the first year was quite challenging, the transition, because you're going from a life in the world where you have all this freedom, and then all of a sudden, here you are, you're a 23-year-old man, and you live in a cell, and you're supposed to be back in your room at a certain hour, and it is just a big shift. And the really great part about the seminary is that you're right there near the chapel, and you can go every morning to the holy services, and every evening, and you're supposed to. And it's really the life of the seminary is around the holy services. And so, I come to New England, and I'd come from the Northeast where it was kind of dark and cloudy, and it was beautiful and sunny. And there's a really strong fraternity, or at least there was then. It probably still is today, I'm sure, amongst the seminarians. And you're given these, the diaconia, the service. You have your rotations with the chapel where you're cleaning the chapel, you're getting wax off the carpet, you're wiping down everything, and like once a month, and you're rotating. And you have your chant group, and it's a little bit of a tough transition at first, but once you get into that, it's wonderful. So after the first year, I didn't want to leave. I mean, I didn't even want to get off campus. I just love the life on campus. And Holy Cross, as you probably know, Yanni, is just a beautiful piece of real estate.
Oh, it's nice.
In Brookline,
it's real
Massachusetts.
Nice.
Yeah, and the chapel of Holy Cross, which is really near and dear to my heart, is the highest point in Boston. I don't know if you know that.
I did not know
So you
that.
can see the dome, the golden dome of the chapel from downtown Boston, from like the Prudential Center. So, you just have this magnificent, beautiful campus. And I think there's a lot to be said for being surrounded by beauty. And I, for one, at least back then, I mean, there were some giants in terms of teachers. I had a few teachers that I hope we're still producing guys like that today in the church, because they impart something to the young guys who want to serve the church that is priceless.
Did you go to
and just seeing their witness.
Did you go to school with maybe Father Nick Helkias, Father John Chakis, any of those guys, Father Stephen Dinas?
Father Nick Halkias, yeah, he was, I think, a year behind me. He was a year younger than me, I believe. Yeah, absolutely. Remember him well. Such a great guy.
Dear friend.
I don't know where he's serving today.
He's a dear friend of my family for many years. His dad, Damien, who started the Camp Nazareth program, just passed away on the 24th, I think. But yeah, that whole family is like church royalty around here. They're very important for how Orthodoxy developed up in the Midwest. They're very cool people.
Yeah, I remember him well, very benevolent, good-natured. That doesn't surprise me to hear that.
Yeah.
I'm very sorry for their loss.
Yeah, he was a
So,
great guy. He really was. We're gonna put out a tribute video, I think, to him, with an announcement video that's gonna come out maybe before or after this, but I have to see. So after getting out of seminary, what did your kind of life in the church and working in the priesthood look like up until now?
yeah, well, I was an unusual student because again, I don't really look Greek. My last name's not Greek. Um, but interestingly enough, even by then, so I entered the seminary in 1999. The other three guys actually couldn't even speak Greek. So, like in our chant class, we had this wonderful chant professor named Mr. Kitsatzis, and he was an amazing chanter, but he didn't speak English. He'd been in America for like 20, 25 years. I think he just didn't want to. And so I would like be translating the courses. And it was this weird situation. And but eventually I would go on to graduate. But I had been working tremendously throughout my years. And I actually had built an internet company, believe it or not, an online retailer while I was a seminarian. A very unusual thing.
Right.
But it just kept growing every year. I would go to the chapel and I would pray for, my work to be successful. And it did succeed. It just kept growing and growing and growing. And but when I graduated, I just felt, I guess, probably like many other guys do, that, I'm just not worthy for this calling. And so the local hierarch, Metropolitan Methodius, had said to me, he said, well, get your dossier together and I'll ordain you. And I just said, I don't think I'm not ready for that. And so actually 8 years elapsed from the time I graduated to the time I was ordained. And during those 8 years, I just kept working, and I built a couple different companies. I don't know, 3 or 4 different companies. And they all were quite successful, but I was never really happy working. And my heart was always in the church. And wherever I was at in the world, I would always just go to the local church and chant or serve in the altar. And so my mind and my heart was always in the church, but I had all these successful businesses. And um, eventually, I just was so unhappy running businesses. I told Presbytera, now Presbytera, she wasn't Presbytera at the time. I said, I don't want to do this anymore. I don't enjoy it. I don't like operations. I just want to, maybe write and serve the church. And at that point, I had begun to sort of convince myself. I'm like, I'm just going to be a layman in the church, and I'll always be a sexton in the altar, and I'll help at the chant stand. And I'm totally happy with that. That's good enough. And I actually, at that time, I started serving in a church called St. Nectarios in Rosendale. I often quip that it's the independent republic of St. Nectarios, of Rosendale, because the Greeks there, they feel like it's a part of Greece. It's so Greek. They have like Alexander the Great Square, and they have Greek flags everywhere. And like you go into the church, like nobody speaks a lick of English.
I love
which
it.
I liked.
Love it.
Yeah, I liked it because I could always speak Greek and keep my skills up. And the priest there was a wonderful man named Father Vasilios Bibis, and he was a wonderful liturgist, and he was also a very pastoral man. And his Greek was perfect. It was above reproach. And I mean, New Testament Greek, liturgical Greek. So to the extent I needed to improve my New Testament Greek at all, I would always run things by like, is this how you pronounce this? Am I doing this right? And because, there's quite a few distinctions between, obviously, there's huge difference between modern Greek and New Testament Greek and liturgical Greek. It's different languages. So in the years I was serving there as a sexton, it was really beneficial because I would have a chance to observe him as a liturgist and to listen carefully, the modern Greek from the people, and then the New Testament Greek from him, and the liturgical Greek. So I was really learning. It was like ongoing education. And that was, I think, 3 years or more. And then eventually a bishop called me from Constantinople. He said, I'm coming for your ordination. I'm like, you got the right Emmanuel? Or, did you get the wrong number? And they said, well, what's the story?
You like how
said,
they always tell you that, like thief in the night.
Yeah.
It's like, yeah, this is when you're doing it.
Yeah, it was something. And but I knew at that point, if I said no again, because I'd already said no earlier, 8 years earlier, it just would never happen. And I knew that was my heart's desire and my calling and my purpose since I was 18. So I said, okay, as long as you know what you're getting into, I'm not worthy of this office. And he just said to me, well, join the club. So that made it easy. So he came to America, and I was ordained a deacon on Saturday and a priest on a Sunday. So I was a deacon for one day. And then right after that, I was assigned to the Albanian Diocese of America. So even though I was a product of the GOA, and he is a GOA bishop now, he's the hierarchy of the ecumenical throne, but my path was a different one. I guess that's always been the case.
What is the Albanian Archdiocese like? Because I don't think a ton of people in America know a lot about them.
Sure, the Albanian. Well, let's say the Albanian diocese. It's a fairly small diocese. It's really only 4 or 5 communities. Some of them are nascent. And you may recall that Albania suffered under communism more than probably any country in history. I mean, certainly in Russia under communism, the church suffered, but Albania was the only state to declare atheism and to have totally extinguished all religion. So under their dictator, who was quite a harsh man, Enver Hoxha was his name, they destroyed all the churches in Albania. So the Albanian people suffered greatly, especially the Orthodox Christians in Albania. And Mao Zedong in Russia and China used to say, we have a friend in the West, and it's Albania. So you can imagine this massive country, Asia, in Asia, referencing this little tiny, European country most people can't find on a map because they were so harsh towards religion. But during that time, the Albanian language and the Albanian piety and the sense of Albanian orthodoxy survived in America and specifically in the Boston area. So many, many Albanians immigrated to America during that time. They came to Boston and they established churches. Many of those churches ultimately would go under the OCA, the Orthodox Church in America, that jurisdiction, but a few remained under the ecumenical patriarchate.
Very interesting.
When communism fell in Albania, they were quite blessed to have Archbishop Anastasios of blessed memory, a saintly man, a missionary-minded man. And I'll tell you a short story. When I first entered the seminary, I saw in the Orthodox Observer newspaper a beautiful picture of a bishop in the liturgy, and his face looked so serene and holy. I just cut out the picture and I taped it on my wall. I just was struck by this man. I didn't know who he was. And only many, many years later, I would come to learn it was actually Archbishop Anastasios of Albania. So it's funny how God works, because I had no clue I would serve the Albanian diocese. And there were a few Albanian students on the campus at Holy Cross, and I became friends with them, and I had begun to learn Albanian. And I had some friends when I lived in Greece that were Albanian. As you know, there is some animosity between Greeks and Albanians, let's say, to put it nicely, as is the case in every part of the world. People with their neighbors, they never get along with each other. Look at North and South Korea, they're ready to kill each other all the time. Look at Turkey and the Armenians. I mean, maybe it's changed today. I think it has probably, but certainly 20, 25 years ago, my Greek friends would call me like, hey, let's go out. Sure, let's go to a cafe and get a frappe, whatever. Like, I'm going to call my Albanian friends too. Like, no, it's okay. I'll do it some other time. It's that kind of thing.
Well, you know what? Here in this part of the world, it's special because none of the neighbors of any countries really like each other, but we all love buying each other's stuff. So,
Yeah. Well, it's all over the world. It's not unique just to that region.
Yeah.
To the Baltic states. But yeah, I mean, neighbors go at each other's throat all the time. There's no question about it. So at any rate, but I had been learning Albanian in Greece a little bit. And then I came to the seminary and some of my friends were Albanian and I started to learn from them. And eventually I would meet my presbytera at Holy Cross and she's Albanian.
Oh,
and
very nice.
Yeah. So I had, let's just say, massive motivation at that point to learn Albanian. So it was somewhat of a natural fit. So it's not like the guys coming out of the seminary were like rushing to serve the Albanian diocese, because frankly, it was a poor diocese. They really couldn't. There's really no salaries available for the priests. And I'm, finishing the seminary, and I've got, these successful businesses already, and I speak Albanian. Basically, my wife is Albanian. It seemed like a good fit.
So it was all providential in this one little package, so to speak, right?
God works in mysterious ways.
Yeah.
But the hierarch of that diocese, Metropolitan Ilia Katri of blessed memory, he passed away a few years ago, was just a magnificent man. I mean, I don't know. I always joke I won the priest lottery because so many fortunate things happened to me. And God blessed me so much. But Bishop Ilia married my wife and I, Presbytera Theodora. He baptized my children. And I was fortunate enough to have him as a bishop. And I learned so much, Bevimu. Yanni, from Ilia. just observing him, being around him, he was different. I mean, he was on a different wavelength altogether. And he actually had gone to Albania, and he had served in the seminary there with Anastasios. Now, Anastasios is actually Greek, but he learned the Albanian language. He speaks Albanian quite well. He did speak Albanian quite well. He passed away recently as well. And Elia was a unique hierarch because he had been married for many years. So he was amongst the very few hierarchs who lived the holiness of holy matrimony and had raised up a beautiful family. But then his presbyter passed away unexpectedly, prematurely, we'll say. And he was elevated to the office of bishop. Now, normally in the canons of the church, that takes about 10 years before someone is elevated to the office of the rank of bishop. But he was elevated right away by the ecumenical patriarchate. And I think partly because he was a giant spiritually, and also because the Albanian diocese really needed a bishop. They were without a bishop for quite a long time. So fortunate for me that I had him, unfortunate for him that he was stuck with me. But yeah, it just wound up being a tremendous blessing. So yeah, that's how it all played out.
Very, very cool. And what do things look like now? What is life like as a priest in this part of your journey?
Well, it got more interesting in the interim. So eventually they were able to get a priest from Albania to come, which they had been working on for a long time. So I was a little bit redundant in Boston, at least for that time. And I was, again, very fortunate. I got invited to Asia. I was able to go serve in Hong Kong. Amazing bishops there. Metropolitan Nectarios and his brother, just amazing men. And again, I saw Orthodoxy in Asia. I'm like, wow, like people in Hong Kong, Chinese people. And it was weird, I remember like the bishops taught me like they'd be on the phone talking to the faithful, and the CCP, the government would be monitoring their phone calls.
I believe it. Yeah.
So you're seeing the church, in America, we're kind of like, really? Because we're free. Now in America, we're learning we're not as free as we think. But it's a little bit more overt under Chinese communism and the Chinese Communist Party.
Yeah, at least they tell you, right?
Yeah, and they said, hey, come serve here, or come serve in Singapore. But I was like, I don't know. It's like 12 time zone difference. It was a little out there. So came back. I was fortunate enough to be invited to the ecumenical patriarchate several times as a young new priest, and to work closely on some projects there. And in hindsight, I got quite an insight, and that's a blessing. Many priests never have that opportunity. I talked to guys who are in their 70s who've never seen the things I saw within the first 2 years of my priestly ministry, or experienced, or the opportunities I had. And then once the Albanian diocese had sort of stabilized, I had been going back and forth to Switzerland with my family for quite a while. I had been visiting Switzerland when I was a student in Germany. I just fell in love with the country.
Zurich is nice, isn't it? It's my favorite place outside of Greece and Europe.
Yeah, Zurich is beautiful, absolutely. Although the Swiss Germans, they're very secular. It's a very secular country, very atheistic country. But when I discovered southern Switzerland, the Italian part of Switzerland, I just thought, why would anybody not want to live here? I mean, it was not a spiritual thing at all. It was totally sad. It was totally superficial. I was like, it's great weather, it's palm trees. You can see, where else in the world can you see snow-capped Alps and palm trees and olive trees? It's like the Garden of Eden there.
Yeah.
And you can just Google like Lugano. And I was like, man, this is beautiful. And I learned that the Greek community there, they had been a lot of Greeks moving to that region because of the economic crisis in Greece at the time. And there had not been a priest there for 40 years. So I told the powers that be in Constantinople, I said, well, why don't you send me there? So they just pick up the phone and they call the Metropolitan in Geneva, again, wonderful man, Metropolitan Germany, and his auxiliary Bishop Makarios, both very warm, wonderful men. They said, well, come out to Geneva and meet with us. We want to meet with you in person. So I went out there, very, very hospitable. Went out at a beautiful lunch on Lake Geneva. And they said, well, yeah, if you want to give it a shot, give it a shot. So I went back to Switzerland, actually moved there, reconstituted the community, got the Greeks organized, got a church from the Catholic Church, a beautiful Baroque chapel, which we began having for the Holy Service. It must have been 500 years, just magnificent chapel. And actually was able to bring in then another priest from Italy, another Greek priest, introduce him to the bishop, help stabilize things there. And just, again, amazing, beautiful experiences of seeing Orthodoxy in yet another part of the world. And I learned that in Europe, you're probably aware of this now because you live in Greece, but the Greeks in America, at least traditionally, probably not so much anymore because we're on like the third generation, but They tended to be a little bit more insular because the church, and this is even in the UPR, Uniform Prayer Regulation, the church was really also designed to preserve the language and the culture.
Yeah,
And
I
so
have this conversation a lot actually because one major criticism I hear from a lot of not so much priests but like newer converts into the faith in the past 5-10 years are like, well, ROCOR is sending out priests who are tough as nails into the middle of the
yeah,
Western United States, living in you know not intentionally, but they're living in poor conditions, and then like the OCA is running parishes that they renovated out of a strip mall, and you have all, but the
yeah,
Greeks particularly, when they say orthodoxy doesn't evangelize well, I think a lot of them are pointing that criticism directly towards the Greeks, and I remind people that the intention of the Greek Orthodox Church at its very conception in the United States was
yeah.
to preserve and support the Greek communities that existed there already, not to expand. But that's kind of changed over the past 30 years.
Right, right. I mean, the church always has to be directed outward as far as I'm concerned, but you're right. Greeks, I always say, and I'll be a little critical because I've got at least half Greek DNA. They can be exclusive, frankly. Not all of them, of course not. And anyone,
Very,
actually,
yeah.
honest, all of the Europeans are guilty of this. You go to France, they're going to tell you their gene pool is the best gene pool. You go to not so much Germany because they have a lot of shame about their past, but a lot of countries, it's just a European thing. I mean, the Greeks
Yeah.
probably do it next level, frankly, and there's studies that actually show that. But that's not true of all Greeks. You can't cast a broad net. But they're such a talented people, the Greek people. They have so many charisma, so many gifts. But we also have this little bit of an Achilles heel.
Yeah.
And but I just remind people that Greek is the language of the church. I mean, it's not up for debate. And the churches in Greece are the most ancient, along with the churches in ancient Illyria and modern day Albania. People don't realize that. The Albanian people themselves don't realize that their rich history, that St. Paul walked in their land and established communities there just as he did in Crete. So, at any rate, I digress. But the point is that, as Greeks, we have to share this treasury of faith and share the language and continue to do that. And in the moment our sense or our perception of the love of God as we know it in Christ becomes apokristika, becomes exclusive, becomes directed inward, it begins to rot. To have spiritual renewal, to live a healthy life in Christ, we have to be directed outward. And
Yeah.
we have to be missionary minded. To me, that is in the very DNA of the early church, the church fathers. There's no question about it. So we have to remember that. And sometimes those, well, not sometimes, as the gospel says, those who are given much, much is asked. I would just say that as Greeks, much is asked of us, and we have to fulfill that. We have to be willing to say, I will go be with the people in Switzerland. I will go be with the people, the Asians in Hong Kong, and I will go be with my Albanian brothers, who, by the way, genetically probably the closest to Greeks and culturally in every other way, although not linguistically, and and get away from that sort of. It's almost funny, right? You see it in my big fat Greek wedding. The father keeps saying, "Oh my gosh, you're going to marry Xeno." It's
Yeah.
funny, but there's a deep truth there. And the young girl, she's going on and on. She's not getting married because her parents are sort of insisting on this idealized version of preserving the Greek DNA, if you will. And it's
Right.
funny on the one hand, but it's also tragic. It's actually a tragic comedy, that movie. And and you see by the time you get to my big fat Greek wedding part three, the third installment, you see the reality of Greece being repopulated with Islam.
Yeah.
So those are the risks. Those are the risks. You've got 600 mosques in Greece now. So I think that the antidote is that people love Christ first and foremost, and we appreciate the culture in which our faith exists and it grew up, but it can never be exclusive. Otherwise, it starts to stagnate, and then something else will come along and replace it,
Well,
at least in the interim.
I look at the Greek identity, as kind of like that annoying uncle on Christmas Day that shows up to your house and he gets you like he's like, oh yeah, here's a big box that has a bedroom set in it. Yeah, here, you're welcome. Put this together for the next like month, and and the reason I say that is because with the Greek identity, we've inherited such a gift, such a multitude of gifts from the time of the philosophers and then eventually the apostles who came here and the tradition of the church that has even grown since the fall of the Byzantine Empire and has kind of renaissanced into what happened after we gained our independence. But um, the thing is that we have so much that we know about, but we have to share that with the world. We have to show them why why our traditions and our culture is so beautiful instead of just telling them all the time. Because if you keep telling, no, you keep telling like Americans, you keep telling, people from other cultures, oh, we're so great, we have all this. It's like it gets a little annoying to them, I'm sure. And I've heard my friends tell me it gets a little annoying, but um the thing is that just for the saints, for example, like I want to say maybe 60 to 70% of what Saint John Chrysostom wrote is not translated into English yet.
Oh, it's
And
incredible. I didn't know
and
that.
yeah, that goes for like a ton of the Cappadocians, and we even have and we have to keep up with the pace too, because we have all of the Qualivadis fathers, everything they wrote,
Yeah,
all of the
yeah,
ones that came
yeah.
after them, like Saint Paisios, Saint
Well,
Porphyrios.
yeah, putting aside the fathers of the church and the contemporary saints, the New Testament is the word of God. I mean,
Yeah,
nothing drives me crazy more than watching the Roman church Latinize Greek words. I mean,
yeah, no
talk about being
kidding.
lost in translation. I talked to a priest. I'm like, wait, you don't read the New Testament in the original Greek? I'm like, and you're ordained? I'm like, how's that even possible? Like, it's a mystery to me. So much is lost. The Greek
Yeah,
language is so rich. And what's going on in America now, Yanni, I'm sure you're aware of it, but there's this massive flourishing of orthodoxy. Glory be to God. But a lot of it is in the OCA and the Rococo Church. Now, the OCA, they've got their canonical irregularities, let's say.
sure.
But they also have an identity crisis because they want to say they're the Orthodox Church in America, but everything they do, their regalia is Russian. So it's like, are you an American church? Or are you really longing for this idealized version of like an 18th century village in Siberia somewhere, some version of Orthodoxy, which has no real connection to America, let's say culturally.
Yeah.
But you see this flourishing amongst all these Russian churches. You have all these Protestant converts who have a lot of zeal, which is a grace from God. And they go into the Russian church, and it all becomes about the forms, right? And the appearance, the long beard, the huge pectoral cross. And I try to remind them, like, Russian piety is wonderful. I mean, there's a wonderful Russian community in Switzerland, which the most beautiful people, honestly. And the Romanians, the same thing. And the Serbian, I mean, such incredibly pious people. They don't take their faith for granted. But let's be real. Orthodoxy has only lived in Russia for 1,000 years. It's lived in Greece for 2,000 years. The Cyrillic alphabet is based on the Greek alphabet. Like, you cannot ignore the roots of Orthodoxy. You cannot ignore God's design for where it would take hold and how it would take hold. So I try to remind people of that. And I've noticed there's like a nascent antagonism towards the Greeks, I think. I'm kind of perceiving it amongst
Yeah, no, that
these
exists.
massive
That's
number of
yeah,
converts.
yeah, that exists.
And like, you know what? Maybe we just need to own it as Greeks and be like, okay, maybe it's our fault and we got to do better. I don't know, but it would be a shame if their idea of orthodoxy is informed by a church in America which is really not mature enough. If it was really mature, the OCA hierarchs wouldn't be running around wearing white kalimafi. Let's be honest; they look like Russian hierarchs.
Well,
They wouldn't have an identity crisis. They wouldn't have a canonical crisis. The Greek church doesn't have that problem.
look,
And I would just, yeah,
I would say the thing, because I like having this conversation with people who are authentically American to their core and love being American in that way. And I'm talking about, like, I know priests who have heritage going all the way back to the Mayflower. I have people that work for the podcast, friends who converted to the Orthodox faith or are in the process of converting, that understand America from its pre-development roots. And the reality of the situation is that maturity comes with age, and
that's right.
the American Orthodox Church is not that old because America is not that old. And
That's exactly right. That's exactly
and
right.
my angle on this is, like, I know some RoCore parishes who are doing a really good job with this, who they wear Greek vestments with Jerusalem Patriarchate style iconography and Antiochian chanting, and it's a slew of parishes that are picking up what they love from each tradition and they're making it their own. And then there's some other things that what I preach as a Greek, I understand that a lot of these people who see themselves as authentically American do not see me as one of their own, and I'm not offended by it by any metric. The virtue that I preach the most to people who have been Orthodox their entire lives is the virtue of gentleness, because nobody wants to be told what to do by perceptually and xenos, because to them that's what we are. And but you have to tell them, it's like, this is what we had, this is how it kind of went over there. See how this fits into this new spiritual life that you've taken on and how it's introduced, because at all angles you have, the American Orthodox new explosion with, Russians and Serbians and the Western Rite and Greek Orthodox and the Romanians and everybody else telling them what to do. And some of them, a lot of them are starting to take a step back to say, okay, how how can we make this a thing that is authentically ours? Because everybody else seems to have it except for them, which is tragic.
Yeah, yeah. There's a lot going on there, though, Yanni, because the issue is that the cultures, the Eastern European cultures where Orthodoxy hails from,
Yeah.
are didactic cultures. Didactikos, legume. And that means you grow up in Romania or Bulgaria or Ukraine or wherever, Russia, Greece, and it's normal to learn from your elders in the community. You're told, like, this is the good thing, this is the bad thing. In America, we have this very strange phenomenon where young people are hyper individualistic to the extent that, and it's really interesting because it's focused mostly on religion, that they're told, well, when you grow up, you can decide what you want to be. Now, the parents wouldn't say that in any other area. They wouldn't say, like, well, if you want to eat broccoli and carrots for dinner or you want to eat McDonald's, you can decide when you're 7 years old. Like, no parent would say that. But the Americans have this really strange idea that individualism has gone off the rails to the extent that they're not even teaching their children anymore. So we have a generation of people who grow up hyper individualistic. They value their individualism above the family, above the community. But the Christian churches have always been community based, and the Orthodox Church has always been hierarchical, and that's a blessing. And there's always been a respect for the elders, the hierones. And so, like, you have this cultural clash where they want to be Orthodox, and you have a lot of these Protestant converts. I'm finding a lot of, for example, this so-called Orthobro movement consists of Protestant converts. Glory be to God, they're coming into the church. Glory be to God. But, let's be honest, to really adopt an Orthodox phronima and an Orthodox mindset, it's going to be like 10 years at least. Yeah. And they don't want to wait because they have all this zeal and excitement, which is glory be to God for that too. It's a grace from God.
And they read far more than I do. I'll tell you that much. I learned things
that's
from
the
them
Protestant,
sometimes.
That's the Protestant mindset right there of sola scriptura, right? It's not, they don't understand epignosis yet. They don't understand that Orthodoxy is an experience. It's practice. It's not just gnosis. It's not just knowledge. So I have yet to meet a Protestant seeker or convert who still wasn't hung up on being able to quote scripture, as even though they kind of understand the problem with sola scriptura.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So the point is, I never met a single one who could make that transition quickly, and understandably, because it takes time. We're human. If you want to be great at anything, if you want to be an Olympic runner, you're looking at 10 years. You want to be the best NASA engineer, 10,000 hours minimum. And so they jump into Orthodoxy, and they're like, well, we don't want to hear the Greek language, or we don't want that. Or we want an indigenous American English-speaking church. Of course, there has to be an indigenous church. But the treasure of Orthodoxy are those people who come from those cultures, because they're the ones you're going to learn from. It's the yayades. It's the ones who grew up and know the sweetness of a life in Christ after 50 or 60 years. But when you have a young American who's maybe 20 years old or 25, and their whole life, they never had an understanding that you learn from your elders, and they're the repository of faith, aside from the priest, is the body of Christ, the laity, then they're trying to, it almost becomes, we say, like leocratia, which is like the Protestant model. The parishioners are going to rule. So the idea of ipakoi, being obedient, sorry, I almost confused with the Albanian, the idea of venerating the priest's hand, it can seem really foreign, like what's going on? But that actually is the great treasure of Orthodoxy, is its richness and its history. And I would just say to the young seekers or the converts, should they hear this episode, that rather than seeing that as an obstacle or a boundary, It's such a tremendous opportunity because eventually there will be, God willing, an indigenous American Orthodox Church, but it certainly will take a lot of time and a lot more time than we've given it. I mean, Orthodoxy has only really substantially existed in the contiguous United States in the continental, 100 years, maybe, let's say substantially. The first missionary churches are probably older than that, but, and certainly in Alaska, who are not the Russian missionaries, but that's so little time. It's really one generation, let's say.
Yeah. But I think this all kind of goes back to that hyper individualism that you were talking about, where, the American and greater Western society encourages this kind of pride within people, and even if they, on the surface, you know, combat against this for the sake of humility, or want to take on a more antiquated like mode of living, they're still kind of stuck in this idea of, well, my life is my own, like, this ethos of American culture. And the reality is that humility will make you great. This is what Jesus Christ tells us in the Gospels. And until people kind of inherit that idea of being able to listen and reverencing the wisdom of people that have been kind of in the game, so to speak, for far longer, not even mentioning the ancestry that happens with those individuals, then it's going to be a rough time. But they'll come around. God, Saint Paisios said, America will be holy. We just have to see how that happens, right? So
Yeah, to be sure. Well, maybe it's happening already, and I hope this, what I'm saying doesn't come off as critical of all these concepts. I hardly feel that way. I think it's such an amazing miracle, actually, to see all this interest in Orthodoxy. But I just hope that this massive influx of converts, we'll see where we're at in 5 or 10 years, that it will be sort of woven into these ancient cultures, and which have lived with Orthodoxy for so long. It's been part of the formation, because religion always lives in a culture.
right.
So to the extent that Orthodoxy truly becomes indigenous in America, and the OCA wanted to jump the gun on that, and it was just too early, but to the extent that we eventually end up with an indigenous autocephalous American Orthodox Church, if that happens, it will be part of an American culture, full stop. And I don't even know what that looks like, because it's not a homogenous culture. You have massive influence of the Latins, of course, who are almost all Catholic in the Southwest. We've got a huge influx of Asians. We've got now a huge influx of the Indian communities who are Hindu. I mean, they're building these huge Hindu temples all over America with gigantic statues. How is that possible? Because historically, all religions, not just Orthodoxy, not just Christianity, they live and thrive in homogenous cultures. It was more homogenous, to be sure, historically, but it's not anywhere near the homogeny that you would normally see that would allow for, the ubiquitous spread of Orthodoxy. So I'm not sure what that looks like. We'll find out. I'm sure God knows. But I do worry a little bit about this, again, this sort of convert mentality that if I just have the right words, if I just have the right appearance, if I just have the right regalia, I'm Orthodox, when really in the deepest heart of our nous, in our soul, that our experience of the mysteries of God's love, it's so much more than just the forms, right? The forms are important, but it's not an end in itself. And if these converts are coming from the Protestant communities, or even the Catholic communities, because Catholics in my mind are almost indistinguishable from Protestants at this point, for them, it's having just the right words. Like a lot of the Catholics kind of just got the right words, and then they're Catholic, bada boom, bada bang, and like you're Catholic, and like it's not. They don't even know what you mean when you say living a life in Christ. They no concept of that experience of the mystery of God's love. So, I think that for these converts coming into the church, it really is going to take some time, and we really must have good teachers in that respect, whether amongst the laity or amongst the clergy. They have to be wise to lead this influx of people. And I would say the responsibility upon the Greeks is the greatest. And I don't know that we're doing a good job as Greeks. If you look at the most prominent voices in the podcast world, for example, where you're operating, Yanni, the most prominent voices are not in the GOA, not even close. And the other major prominent voices are all incidentally converts. Now, some of them have been converts for a long time, but some of them, my sense is that they haven't fully shed their Protestant identity and mindset, and they're reaching hundreds of thousands.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, God willingly, we'll get there. My program and yours. We'll try to get our piece of the cake, so to speak. But one thing that does unite orthodoxy around the globe is financial illiteracy. And one thing that I give you a lot of credit for is, you've been in the world of business and dealing with money for a lot of your life. And I think there's something very valuable to that because, whether it's priests dealing on an individual level, parishes, or entire archdiocesan jurisdictions, they seem to have a problem with certain aspects of making and managing whatever money they have. And I wanted you to maybe tell us a little bit about your business ventures and what other Orthodox Christians, either in Mass or on the individual level, can learn from your experiences and how to be financially stable, so to speak.
All right. Well, you want the abridged version? You want the
Talk
non-PG
talk
version?
away,
What do you
man.
want?
It's a podcast.
All
Yeah,
right.
yap
All
away.
right. Well, so before I had this calling to be a priest, I always had sort of an aptitude for business, and I built my first business when I was 16. When I came back from Germany, and it was a photo studio. It was very successful, hugely successful. And then later on, I built a company that manufactured professional photo equipment. We sold it online. I built that company from the seminary completely under wraps. So like I would go to Vespers at night, I'd come home, have dinner, go to my room, work till like 3 a.m. in the morning. So I'd be going to class at seminary, and my teachers would get mad at me. They'd be like, they were hard on me because they knew I had the ability to get straight A's. But, they really held me to a higher standard. And they'd be like, you don't understand responsibility. You're showing up late to class. You're tired. I'm like, no, I have too much responsibility. It's not that I was interested in working in the secular world. My desire at the time was really to be a teacher. I thought I'd go on to do a PhD and so forth, maybe a professor. But I had all these financial responsibilities I inherited. And I tried to explain that to the school. I mean, you could just like cut me a break a little. Like, I mean, for all the goodness and beauty that exists at seminary, at least at the time, the administration caused a lot of heartache. So like when my first week I showed up, like, not only do we not have the scholarship we promised you, now that you've sold everything and moved to Boston, we're not going to give you that, but give us $10,000 before you go to the cafeteria to eat anything. I was like, really? But it wasn't just about worrying about myself. It was that I had, financial responsibilities for my home, which my family life had completely fallen apart at that time. My parents' marriage and so forth, and it created a lot of financial hardships. But I had high ideals. So I thought, when I was younger, I thought, well, I could just fix these problems if I made money. And so I would use this aptitude to do that. And I was really pretty angry. I was like, that's so stupid. You're going to make serving the church, the obstacle is going to be money. Like, seriously, that's so superficial, in my opinion. So driven, and this is not spiritually healthy, by the way. Don't try this at home. I was like, I'm just going to build a company. So it was like 1999. The internet's nascent. It's an emerging. I start building this website out of my dorm room in Polomonakos Hall. And like when I say sell, it's probably 8 feet by 12 feet. And I've got a laptop and I've got like a Motorola flip phone. And like I was like ahead of the curve. I'd plug it into my laptop and I would get like cellular data so I could work on my laptop anywhere I was at. And I like teach myself to code. And I just started building this company. And like I knew a lot about photography and photo equipment because I built this photo studio. It was really successful. We did all these high school proms and homecomings and stuff when I was like a teenager, and the company had already generated hundreds of thousands of dollars. I'd be making like $20,000 a day when I was just a kid, but I also would give away a lot of what I earned. But I was really interested in I made a lot of my own photo equipment when I was building that company. And so I was like, well, maybe I'll sell equipment. Like I really like photography from a young age. It was sort of my thing. And you can kind of see that in our podcast today. If you watch our podcast, it's very visual. I just always liked cinema and photography and stuff. But no one in the school had any clue what I was doing. So, but I kind of understood there was this rise in manufacturing in Asia. I was like, if you can sort of link the rise in internet use and online commerce with like Chinese manufacturing, you could probably do very well. And so I connected those two things and was able
So
to
you
actually
got
get the
ahead of the
Chinese.
curve on things like Temu now and like Alibaba and things of that nature.
There was no Alibaba when I started.
Well, what I mean
we
is
were
like
one of
you understood this concept prior to their existence.
Yeah, if I was not in school trying to do a 4-year MDiv in 3 years, that was the other thing. I was trying to do a 4-year program in 3. And building, I'm sure it would have went on to be a huge enterprise. Had I not, my heart not really been on the church. If I was really into business, which I wasn't really into business, it was like I had to do it, and I had the ability to do it. So, anyways, our administration was giving me a hard time, and so that company went on to generate like $40 million, like more than like the whole administration building at Holy Cross was like 100 people on the payroll. And like I had already generated more revenue than the entire seminary by the time I graduated. And it was that level of success. And so, yeah, I mean, our photo equipment is still found all over the world. If you search for it, we were shipping products all over the world. We outsourced everything. So what I did is I set up a lot of the operations on the West Coast so that by the time I was done with Vespers and dinner, like business would still be open on the West Coast. So like our bank, our fulfillment warehouse would all be on the West Coast. That's how I was doing basically time zone arbitrage. So I could do my master's degree and build a company at the same time. I told no one what I was doing. This is all true story, Yanni. No one I was doing. My last year, I remember I was sitting in the cafeteria with this Orthodox priest, and he says, "What are you doing?" And I said, "Well, you want me to tell you the truth?" I'm like, "I'm just going to talk about it." Finally, he said, "Sure." He said, "Well, this whole time I've been building this internet company. It's like huge now. We ship products all over the world." And he just looked at me. He said, "No, you're lying." He said, "Tell me the truth." He said, it's because you have money from your parents." And I just realized, a lie is easier to accept than the truth sometimes. So I said, "Okay, yeah, I have money from my parents. My parents had no money at all. I inherited debts." So, and he said, "Okay, that's what I thought." So I thought, some things you just can't talk about. So I never really talked about it. But at any rate, after that, I went on to get into real estate, and all these things kept growing, and it just got bigger and bigger. And then I had commercial real estate and residential real estate. And I really took if there's anything I really enjoyed in my secular work, it was actually technology development. So we went on to develop a social network very early in 2005, 2006. It was quite remarkable. Around the time Facebook emerged, actually. And we'd actually built this application called Fleck. It was like Instagram today. And it was a feed where you could upload photos. And I remember telling like staff in my different companies, like, you guys should join this thing, like upload your avatar. And they're like, "No, we're never going to do that. That's crazy." There's security.
And then the next thing you know,
really, yeah, really ahead of its time. And then the photo business had become so successful that there was actually an offer to acquire it from a company called Vitech Group, which is a publicly traded British company. They own the brands Manfrotto. If you go to an Apple store and you buy a tripod, you'll see Manfrotto tripods. There was that company. So at the time, the incumbent players were manufacturing photo equipment in France and Germany. Like you've probably heard of like Carl Zeiss, and Manfrotto was an Italian brand, and Jados was a French brand. Like they were really late to the Chinese manufacturing game, but I was way ahead of them. So they were really interested in what we're doing. And plus, we were by far the most advanced in direct sales. So we were selling direct. There's no middleman. We were developing and designing our equipment manufacturing in Asia, and we were bringing it direct to market at like a fraction of the cost of the incumbent players in Europe. And I went to Asia, I went to Shanghai and stuff. And I'm looking at these guys, and I'm like, man, they're going to eat our lunch. Like they look like they drink 5 Red Bulls for breakfast the way they work.
Yeah.
And then like, you go to Greece, and I'm like, yeah, I'm going to be gone for August, maybe September, depends on the weather. You're like, oh boy, we're in trouble. And in America too, you'd have guys coming out of college in America, and they're like, I need to work from home 3 days a week, and I'm going to, have to have flex time and 5 vacations a year. And I'm like, you guys have no clue what's coming, because like the Chinese, they just don't think this way. They're wired differently when it comes to productivity. So that was like 2000. I remember telling, like, I got meetings with my staff, and I'm like, we're all going to have Chinese bosses one day if we keep doing this. And now here we are, fast forward 25 years, and they own massive parts of America, and they're well funded. And look at the rise of the Chinese economy. The most
and the Indians.
Yeah, them too. Yeah, and we actually had begun first manufacturing in India, but honestly, they lacked the discipline and QA that the Chinese had. So we eventually, we very quickly moved to China. But at any rate, long story short, eventually I really got interested in capital markets, and it kind of harkened back to my time in Seattle, because here I am in Seattle. Like I said, it's called 1997, 1998, 1999. The internet's emerging. Seattle is an incredibly fertile area for enterprises. You have Microsoft, you've got Boeing, you've got Starbucks, you've got Amazon. And I'm watching my friends' parents, like my family was, let's say, economically challenged, not because they weren't smart. My father was a brilliant man. Actually, my mother's also very brilliant as well in different ways. But for other reasons, we were never really stable financially. And I'm watching my friends, and their parents are like buying their 5th home on Maui. And I'm like, they don't even work. I'm like, what is it? Well, it was this little thing called stock options. And in Microsoft, and like we would have friends that were like, like one of our Greek family friends, like she was a seamstress at Boeing. She'd be sewing like seats for airplanes, like the fabric. And like they had like multiple homes and were like multimillionaires. And I got to thinking, like, that's interesting. Capital markets, like these people, they're not working any harder, but they're growing quite wealthy. So that was always in my mind, that image coming out of Seattle, this really fertile environment. And so eventually, when I really never loved or even liked running businesses, it was just a default activity for me. And I solved my financial problems even before I finished the seminary. And I just kept doing it because I didn't know what else to do, and I didn't feel worthy to become a priest. And then eventually I discovered the work of the great Benjamin Graham, who was the mentor of Warren Buffett. And he described things in a way that I had never heard anyone describe it, but I had already been doing everything he described in his seminal work, The Intelligent Investor. And then I read all the essays of Warren Buffett, and I almost felt ashamed when I first encountered the work because I thought I'm really arrogant. Maybe I am arrogant, I don't know. But I was like, I've always been thinking in these ways, but I just never really had the clear framework and words that's going to describe it the way Graham
to articulate it. Yeah.
Yeah, and then I remember during the financial crisis in 2009. You're probably too young to remember that, but
I remember that.
Yeah, banks were failing. We had 60 million contaminated titles to homes in America because of the whole mortgage securitization fraud, and it was an embarrassing time in America. In my mind, it was a catalyst, a turning point for where we're at today, which is insanity in our capital markets. And I felt ashamed to be American for the first time. I thought, this is horrible. These banks have done horrible things. Nobody's gone to jail.
You think it's going to happen again?
Well, it's already happening. We can get into that in a minute. But at any rate, I remember watching interviews with Warren Buffett on TV, and like, while everyone's panicking, the guy's like laughing, he's relaxed, he doesn't look upset. I'm like, and that's what got me thinking, like, what does this guy do exactly? And that brought me back to sort of the tying together my experience of watching, what could happen with really productive enterprises and capital markets in Seattle in the late 90s, to discovering by chance, by God's grace, the work of Ben Graham, and understanding this confluence of there's a natural progression, Yanni, from building a company to becoming an allocator. Greeks don't always make this transition, especially first generation Greeks, because Greece does not have a really transparent capital market environment. So for Greeks, and not just Greeks, many Europeans, they always tie investment to real estate. So that's why you see Greeks that come to America, they start a pizzeria, then they buy the pizzeria, and they own the land, and blah, blah, blah. They never really make the transition to a more productive asset class. They always understand it as real estate because they think it's less risky and more tangible, which is a logical fallacy. So you don't find too many Greeks early on in the first, second generation who make the transfer to more sophisticated security markets, like equities, bonds, and so forth. But for me, that happened very early, even though I owned plenty of real estate and all of those things. So, but then I had this life in the church, right? So I'm sort of got all these things going in my life. And I'm looking at the church, and I'm like, the thing that bothered me about the church, Yanni, was that we always had our hand out like this.
Yeah.
Like, pass the basket, ask the Ayadas to put money in, raise money, raise money, raise money.
It's a bit humiliating at a certain point.
It is. And I remember asking the bishop when he came to ordain me, I said, well, you ever look at the return you're getting on that capital? And like, I might as well, for lack of a better expression, be speaking Greek. Now, it doesn't apply in this case because he spoke Greek, but you get the idea. Like, he's like, rate of return. And so I started reading the annual reports of the seminary, and they were filled with false information. Like, they would just publish anything, it had nothing to do with reality. And I just pointed out to them, I said, well, if you took even a small amount of money and you compounded it 20%, like Berkshire Hathaway, for example, it would turn to a very large amount of money. And you wouldn't have to have a one-track mind that was always set on raising money, and then you didn't know where it went, into a black hole, never to emerge again, which is a real problem in an institutional church, and not just the Greek church. So, it took me down a rabbit hole, Yanni, because on the one hand, I thought, could I impress upon the hierarchy in the institutional church sort of the wisdom of good stewardship, which, let's be honest, Warren Buffett's, he's agnostic. Ben Graham was a Jew. Like, I thought, well, maybe the collection of interest, which is really what compound interest is, it's we could say usury, it's forbidden by the church historically, but we're all engaged in it already. So I'm not blessing it. I'm just saying, if you're going to do it, you might as well be a little intelligent about it, which we're not.
I agree, but
and that doesn't make us better stewards, and it doesn't empower our ministries. It just means that we're in one uncomfortable and awkward situation after another when it comes to economics and finance, which I don't see how that improves the life of the church. That's all I was saying.
I agree with you, and it's like, what I'm saying is there should be more people like you, because people who know how to deal with finances either don't exist or don't approach the hierarchs of any of the jurisdictions to have these conversations. And everybody's just like broke.
That's exactly right, Yanni. I'm so glad you're saying it, and you're not mincing your words, but I was in an unusual situation because, the hierarchs asked me initially, And I was fortunate enough to get involved at the highest levels, but then I backed out. I chose to back out. I didn't think I could actually ultimately make a positive impact, was my experience. And but I commend the hierarchs. And our current archbishop, your current archbishop, because I'm not in the GOA, but I'm a product of it. He deserves a lot more credit than he gets. He's not perfect, the Archbishop of the Archdiocese of America, but he deserves a lot of credit for being open-minded and for asking questions and trying to do better. And I don't think he gets enough credit sometimes for the things he does right. So I give him a lot of credit in that area because he really did try to at least explore doing things differently. But if you grow up in Greece or you grow up in Turkey, these concepts of how to handle money are so foreign. The idea of transparency is so foreign. That's why when you're in Greece, there's a lot of wealth in Greece. But that's where you see, like the brand new Mercedes S600 parked on the street that's falling apart, the infrastructure. And Athens, is starting to make Bangladesh look good. It's not because there's poor Greek people. It's because there's no transparency. There's tax evasion. It's a low trust society. So if you grow up in that and it's like wired in your brain, it's really hard to adopt sort of this Western high trust society that's prerequisite to invest capital in more productive assets other than just real estate. I mean, real estate, the return on real estate, and a lot of Greeks are going to hate it when I say this because they own tons of real estate. But if you adjust properly for inflation in the post-World War II era, the aggregate rate of return is about 4%.
That's it.
And if you really calculate your carrying costs correctly, and Greeks will hate that because they all own tons of real estate. In my opinion, it's a terrible business because there's so much work involved in it and management. The S&P 500 has returned 12% during that period, 3 times that amount. Now, if you had invested, let's say in 1960, $10,000 in an index fund, they didn't really exist then. Let's just say across the S&P 500 versus buying up every pizzeria on every corner or gas station, you would have exponentially greater wealth. But again, there's this mistrust of the equities markets because it doesn't really exist in Greece, much less Romania or Serbia or Russia,
right.
Because they are low trust environments.
But even looking at like the tourism market here in Greece, do you still think it's like an unstable investment for people to look at?
Absolutely. Well, there's no country which ever got wealthy off tourism, Yanni. Look at the countries that depend on tourism. They're never financially free. Look at Croatia or Greece. It's like being a hamster in a wheel. You can't innovate in tourism. You can only raise prices on food and drink so much. The hospitality business is always a low margin business, no matter where you're at in the world. The biggest, most efficiently run hotel groups in the world operating like 2% margins. The Greeks are so wired for hospitality. They do it really well. They're probably the best in the world, frankly, because for them, it's biblical, their understanding of taking care of your guests. They deserve a lot of credit for that. But they're never gonna become Switzerland. There's a reason why the Swiss could give a damn about tourism. Yeah, it's a great country to be a tourism. That's not where they make their wealth. You're never going to get rich off tourism, so to speak.
Huh.
Really, I'm looking at every country that depends on tourism. Show me one that's really an economic powerhouse. Zero.
No, you're right. I just never thought about it in the sense of like there's kind of a ceiling there. Yeah, you can only after a beer kind of passes up
that's
$12,
an understatement.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, there's an understatement. It's a ceiling. You become a prisoner to that operation. It's a high. It depends on a low. It depends on a labor force which is not very educated, frankly. So you have to have a large population of labor, which is not well compensated, which is not good for the culture. Like if you look at, I'm going to just say this, I shouldn't say it, but every time I go to Greece, I don't see those people who are financially successful and real estate successful because they are really shrewd thinkers. They can be very shrewd thinkers. But frankly, there's a lot of exploitation of low-cost labor. I remember last time I was in Crete, and I'm staying in this beautiful villa, and I'm looking at the ocean, and it was really pretty low cost. And I'm watching all these guys build these beautiful stone walls. And I'm talking to them in Greek, and like, they don't speak a lick of Greek. Turns out they're Albanian. I'm like, what do you make? €2 an hour. Well, yeah, in America, we could build beautiful things too if we were exploiting labor at €2 an hour with no health benefits and, no vacation time. And, we can hire and fire people without consequence and treat them horribly. So we as Greeks got to come to terms with the fact that really a lot of the economy has been built off of the exploitation of low-cost labor.
I think that's a big reason why I feel like that's a big reason why the Communist Party here is picking up steam. Like a lot of people think that's the solution. Yeah, you see the posters for them everywhere. It's like it's not massive like it is in other places in Europe, but I think some people realize that like, if doing well relatively is $30 a day, then there is a problem.
I totally. And it's just It's the Greeks don't really have to do that because they are gifted business people. It's in their DNA, it's in their blood. But they never get past, like, they kind of stop at real estate. It's like a ceiling for them, like tourism or real estate or a restaurant. That's like, where most stop, not all, but most. And very few get to the top of the game in something more sophisticated. It's not a lot more sophistication to make the jump. If you want to read more about this, Yanni, we have a Substack that we run now where we publish articles where we talk about sort of the basics of analyzing securities and understanding, price versus value, the power of compound interest, really basic stuff. I mean, it's really been my lay vocation. As a priest, I've never received a salary. I not only put myself through Holy Cross, my entire adult life as a priest and service manager, never received a penny from the church. I've always taken the poorest communities or started communities, financed them myself. So it was always a requirement to have a lay vocation. But I really, since 2009, I published hundreds of articles on this topic, on sort of impressing people that good stewardship can be very Christian. It's a super risky thing, though, especially for the clergy. I'm not going to lie, because the saying from the gospel that the love of money is the root of all kinds of evil. Once you get to that level where you can compound capital and you can make, $500,000 in a week because you made a shrewd allocation, you think that's not filled with temptation. It's filled with enormous temptation.
Yeah.
The clergy honestly are best to stay away from it completely. You can understand it, but I would say
but somebody's got to help them. That's kind of the issue. You know what I mean? It's like,
yeah, well, what I noticed amongst the clergy, again, I'm probably speaking too freely here, but brilliant men in the GOA, some of the best clergy you'll ever meet are in the GOA. But sometimes they are feeling a little bitter later in their ministries because, frankly, they just haven't been able to provide in many cases, not all, but in many cases, a stable economic situation for their wife and children. And again, I'm not saying run into the stock market or do anything crazy like that. No, that's not what I'm saying. I'm saying if you understand the basics of how to be wise with capital, which doesn't rise above the level of second grade math. It's like addition, subtraction, division. And Greeks are really good with this. They're already doing it in real estate and in their restaurants. Just nobody gets them beyond that. They start to see the world differently. They start to understand things like future value and how inflation affects what they have. And they say, well, Father, I don't have enough money to do something. Like, if you have like $10, it's enough. You're either going to do something wise with it or you're going to do something foolish. It's really a state of mind. And to the extent that frees you from feeling that you're a hamster in a wheel and you're imprisoned to a debt structure and all these other things that the American society can impress upon you very quickly, then you'll feel very empowered as a priest and you'll feel very free to focus on what you should be focusing on, which is your ministry.
well, yeah, I mean, that is kind of the entire reason the Orthochat exists. Like, at the very least we can do is kind of help mitigate the exposure problem. There's a lot of churches out there that people don't know exist, and there's a lot of kind people coming into the Orthodox Church that, want to use their financials to help build up the communities that they exist in. That's been my and the organization's angle on it for about the past year and a half, and we're trying to make somewhat of a difference. And we'll talk more about that a little bit later, but
Glory be to God, Yanni. I'm sure you're making a difference already.
we're
Thank God
working
the
on
church
it.
has people like you. Yeah.
We,
Thank God the church has young people like you.
well, I mean, also, Christ has to deal with me, which, it kind of evens everything out. But,
I'm sure he's happy to deal with you.
the idea, like, in America, at least, I talk to a lot of Orthodox young men, and, some of them have, kind of fallen into at least the propaganda of, like, hit the trades, and that's its own hamster wheel. But it can help develop like some short-term capital, but like I don't think they know what to do with it past, like, the initial point. um and then you have some people that just can't find a job, or it's like, like, what, like, the with the current economic situation in America right now, what would you suggest to young people, young families that want to, that are God-fearing people, in the Orthodox Church, but also don't really know what to do with themselves in terms of, like, they're afraid to have kids, they don't know how they're going to pay their mortgage, stuff like that, like they have no clue how to carry it.
Yeah, those are all lies of the devil. So, to the extent that young people we're speaking to are interested in their life in Christ, their faith, I would encourage them actually to engage in work which is physical, gets them outdoors, keeps them away from corporate America. That can be soul crushing. It can really, believe it or not, actually eat away at your sense of identity as a man. In fact, we're doing our next podcast episode, episode 48, will be on this very topic. And I hope you'll have a chance to watch it. I think the job environment is going to become quite dicey increasingly because of the rise of AI. It's just usurping jobs left and right, and it's going to continue to at a blistering speed. Don't get sucked into Western consumerism. It's really a trap. So whatever you earn, live below your means. You don't need the things you think you need. You need remarkably little. If you wake up in the morning and you feel bad for yourself, just pull up some pictures online of the poorest countries in Africa where they don't have clean drinking water, they live in mud huts, and thank God, make the sign of the cross, because it begins with gratitude, because you're not living in that situation. You got a heck of a lot more opportunities than they do. Little children growing in, Rwanda or something. I don't know, all these two countries are so poor. So they don't have even the basics. Like if you got clean drinking water, you're doing good. You got fresh air to breathe, you're doing good. God gave you health and life and mostly freedom still in America. There's a million different things you can look for to do, especially with faith and pray. When I was building my companies in the seminary, I prayed all the time. All the time. God, just let me succeed. Show me what to do. Show me the answers. I don't really have the answers, but I just want to meet these obligations I have. I want to serve you. I'll give my life to you, but just help me overcome this. Like I cannot overstate the importance of prayer, and God will show you the way. You may not even know it, but God will be leading you if you just do that. Just pray constantly. And so avoid debt, as it says in Proverbs, the borrower is the slave to the lender. As soon as a lot of these young people in college, they finish college, they've got a Capital One Visa card in their hand, and they got all these loans being thrown at them, and buy a car and do this. And unlike Greece, where, or a lot of European countries where people inherit land, there's no capital gains tax on that, and there's generational wealth. There was a lot of freedom. Like Greece got in trouble when it really took on debt.
Yeah.
And as you know, the word for debt, essentially in Greek is hamartia, it's sin, right? Forgive us our debts, forgive us our sins. It's interchangeable. It's a synonym. So you're really living a life of sin when you take on debt, and you become a slave to the lender. And you don't want to be a slave to the lenders in America. It's pretty harsh. We're not talking about a bunch of good, Orthodox Christian guys, running JP Morgan. Jamie Dimon might have some Greek identity, I guess, but the banks are, they're ruthless. They're probably second only to the pharmaceutical industry and the damage they can do to society. So we saw that during the housing crisis in 2009. You're starting to feel a lot of people feeling a lot of pressure. Just extricate yourself from that pressure. Be willing to do work that is spiritually uplifting, even if you're an educated man, even if you're morphos menos, as we say in Greek, you're cultured, you have a well-formed mind. I think there's a lot to be said for our spiritual growth, for doing things that are spiritually healthy. And in terms of feeling that they can't get married or have children, I'll pause for a second here. You're okay?
Yeah. But
in terms of feeling that you can't have children, that's just what could be more from the devil. Again, Google those countries in Africa where they don't have clean drinking water. They have like 10 kids. They're not starving. Give me a break. There is no greater blessing in the world than to find a wife. If God finds you worthy of marriage, nothing's greater. And to have children. I don't care if you have to live in a U-Haul box. If you get those things, you're a rich man. So don't let these lies of the devil infiltrate. Oh, I can't afford a family. This stupidity is infecting Greece, even an Orthodox country, where you see the birth rates in Greece falling off a cliff.
Why do you think it's happening so globally, this birth rate crisis?
Narcissism. Family is a sacrifice. The rise of the selfie. It's the rise of I want to be free. It's this Western indoctrination. The rise of feminism. The women have been told for so long, and this is especially true in Greece. It's actually much less pronounced in Switzerland, believe it or not. They are going to go out and they're going to be in the working world. They're going to be lawyers and corporate executives. Show me a woman who's climbed the corporate ladder who's really maintained her femininity. So you got this whole generation of Greek women, really from the mid 1970s on, who aren't having kids. And the result, again, you can see it anecdotally in this sort of art, right, with that Big Fat Greek Wedding, where the installment 1, she's not getting married because she wants to be professional. By installment 3, you see the Islamic culture displacing the Greek culture, which is a reality. And the Islamic women, they have 6 kids per woman. That's from the devil. What's greater than to be like the Theotokos? We see the icon of her with the Christ child in her womb, in her bosom. Like it's modern Western women we're sold a lie, and their marriages are falling apart. And the same thing's happening to the men; they're becoming effeminate. It's amazing. Let's just talk about Greece. Major problem in Greece as well.
Yeah.
Where Greece becomes what, the first Orthodox country to legalize same-sex marriage? Give me a break. That has nothing to do with orthodoxy. That's a cultural sickness. A major cultural sickness. So Greece is the poster child for low birth rates, an Orthodox country. And you think it's a coincidence that it's hand in hand with the rise of this lie that a marriage is anything other than between a man and a woman? And you get these frustrated men who've lived this, let's say, alternative lifestyle. They can't really make children naturally. So what are they doing? They're involved in human trafficking. We're going to go to Bulgaria or Russia, and we're going to have a surrogate. And what the hell? You think a child's
or worse, or they like mutilate themselves to where they can, kind of. I don't even want to say it, but you know what I'm talking about.
Yeah, it's Goebbels' World War II. It's a scientific experiment. It's demonic. I mean, absolutely demonic. So, I would say that if you look at the women who choose to live their true nature, the way God made them to be feminine, to be caregivers, they can feed a child with their breast. The men cannot do that. And you see these crazy marriages where the roles are reversed, and the woman is out in the corporate world and the man's staying home, feeding the babies and changing their diapers. And then you've got the loss of passion between a man and a woman. You've got the loss of this beautiful erotic love that manifests.
Well, I think everybody's like chemically and mentally castrated to a certain point. It's like
that's right.
Well,
and then the erotic act, the act of the conjugal bond between a man and a woman, becomes purely, according to Madison Avenue, which has got a bill of goods to sell, becomes purely a biological act rather than the mystery of God's love between a man and a woman, which binds them together and gives rise to new life. It's the only time a man and a woman have the opportunity to participate in God's creation as agents of his creation. Nothing is greater. Nothing. So we've been robbed. Modern women and modern men have been robbed of their identities and robbed of the holiness of the family. And we better find our way back, because there is nothing greater than Western civilization and Christian civilization. And as someone who spent a lot of time in Europe and served in various churches in Europe, I'll tell you, the further west you go, it's an absolute disaster. The Catholic Church is a failed church. Let me start there. Protestant churches are dead. Thank God for holy orthodoxy, including the Russian church and Ukraine, because that constitutes, 70% of the global Orthodox population. But for the Orthodox Church in Eastern Europe, I'm pretty sure Christianity would just collapse in Europe. And you see this confluence of the old sort of spiritually dead Christianity is manifest in the Catholic and Protestant churches in Switzerland. And then you see the insertion of the Orthodox Serbians, the Romanians, the Russians who are moving in and keeping Switzerland with a Christian identity, because Switzerland is one of the few countries that doesn't allow mosques. They don't allow hijab, unlike the UK, which looks like a caliphate, and France.
No kidding.
So however misguided the Switzerland has become, they're smart enough, even though their only two sanctioned religions are the Protestant Catholic Church, they're smart enough to quietly let the Orthodox in so that they don't lose their Christian identity completely. And so you look at a model and you say, well, maybe the Great Schism in 1054 had to happen. It was sad and tragic as it was, because the Catholics would fumble the ball so greatly and continue to fumble it so greatly. It's like a circus in Rome, that Orthodoxy would be there preserved to save Christianity.
It's literally a circus. I saw clowns and trapeze dancers there, like not even like 5 years ago. So yeah, it's literally.
Well, you got this new guy Leo. I mean, I don't want to be too negative, but I mean, come on, he elevates James Martin. It's like a preoccupation with these alternative lifestyles. It's an infestation of homosexuality in Rome. It's all they think about, it seems like. And it's just such a disaster with their insistence on celibacy. You got 465,000 celibate priests running around. I would say 85% of them are gay and hiding other probably bigger, more deeper issues. And you've got a cycle of abuse of children, physical abuse and sexual abuse I don't think it's really been curtailed. And more importantly, you've got an entire culture of abuse. If it's not sexual abuse, it's another form of abuse. It's just, what a joke. And that's why when you meet Catholics, they all are angry at their church. You ever notice that? You talk to a Catholic, they're never happy.
They're like, angry in like this general sense. Yeah, they're just naturally like spiteful at something all the time.
That's right. And you never meet Orthodox like that. You might meet Orthodox who are like, yeah, I go to the club every Friday and Saturday night, they're living a life in the world or whatever. And like, But they're like, they'll be in church on Christmas Day, they'll be in church on Easter, and like they might go only twice a year, but they never have negative feelings towards their church. No matter how far away they drift away from a secular way of life, they never have that bitterness. They may not like the priest, they may not like the bishop, whatever, but they never dislike orthodoxy. That's really, really telling.
Yeah, yeah. There's a lot of problems. There's a lot of things going on. It's that's.
Yeah,
But
we're all over the place in this conversation.
yeah, But by God's grace, things will kind of pan out hopefully because there's some old saying about um about how drunkards and fools have a special providence. You know what I mean? And I think that's the majority of people, and God watches them particularly to not allow them to drive their lives into complete disaster. So me being the chief
Well,
of
yeah.
that category, but
Well, no, don't say that, Yanni. But there's been a lot of threats to the church historically. Nothing. I mean, from the very earliest days, the first ecumenical councils were in response to existential threats, heresies. The church has been dealing with heresy and existential threats from its beginning. What we're seeing today with these ideologies and gender confusion and the insanity of using pronouns and all this craziness, it's just another heresy. It's just another threat. It's just another attack on the church. But the church prevails and it endures.
it does.
And it has for 2,000 years. And now look at what's happening in America. We're seeing an awakening, a spiritual awakening. We need good teachers more than ever now. We don't need AI to inform anyone. We need good teachers to show these young people who are having a spiritual awakening. The pendulum seems to be swinging in the other direction now because they realize how spiritually bankrupt what the sort of liberal madness, this woke ideology was selling them. It was leading to death, spiritual death, physical harm, disorientation, widespread mental illness in America, widespread drug use, widespread violence. People are saying, whoa, something is really wrong. We need Christ. Now, are they going to find it in an American-spawned cult like the Mormons or the Pentecostals or Jehovah's Witnesses or evangelicals who they're not Christians at all, or are they going to find the church that Christ established on earth? It's incumbent upon us as Orthodox, and especially the Greeks, because they've inherited the most, to be good teachers and to show the way and to lead. Because there's never, in my lifetime, I've never seen greater interest. It's so different than when I was a student, a theology student or a seminarian. I mean, the world's changed so greatly. Just in these last couple of years.
Speaking of this, what do you think is causing like the big influx into Orthodoxy in the United States and the West?
Well, I think it's a few things. I think it's the insanity of this liberal ideologies that was gone so far that it was willing to chemically or surgically castrate children. People are saying, wait, maybe this is really evil. I don't know. I can't think of a greater evil thing. Maybe there's something more evil. I just haven't thought of it. I think it's the greatest evil. I think the doctors who perform the surgery should face the death penalty, frankly.
I agree.
These poor children, they grow up and their rates of suicide go up 20-fold. There's nothing worse you can do than rob a young child whose brain is not even fully formed and convince them that they're a different gender than God made them, and to go down a surgical path that would rob them of the ability to procreate and to enjoy marriage and the pleasures of marriage and so forth. And then I think, frankly, God has worked through our political leaders. A lot of people might be offended by this, but Trump, he's a man, he's an imperfect man, but he has done more, in my opinion, to speak to the issue of Christian persecution in recent decades than any other president. And I've long said for decades that Christians are the most persecuted religious group in the world. The Jews are
statistically
the most
that's true. Statistically, that's very true.
It is, but the Western society has come to believe for some reason that the Jews need all this protection, and actually they're the most protected class by far, even more than the homosexual class. And then you have these Christians that it doesn't get any playtime, it doesn't get airtime when you see massive persecution. So there's this incipient animosity towards the church that many with this liberal mindset have, and I think that Trump, despite his imperfections as a man, we all have them. He's done a lot of really important and good things by just speaking about the problem. And he had these executives. Orders to stifle or curtail or limit, anti-Christian bias in government, which I've lived through myself for over a decade. If you know anything about my story with my public fight with the government, and just seeing him act on that, I think those two things together, seeing that these ideologies, these dark ideologies, lead to physical and spiritual death and a president who was willing to talk about it openly opened the door for a generation to say, we're lost. We need something different.
Or more
And
importantly, they've had enough.
What's there? Yeah, and what's there? The church.
Yeah.
So that's my take on it.
Yeah. And, I don't think survival in the world is really like an excellent concept without participation in the spiritual life. So for you personally, what lives and teachings of the saints like help you get through every day?
Yeah, well, it's always wonderful. I pray often through the intercession, not only of the Theotokos, but of St. Catherine. We built St. Catherine's Chapel, the first Orthodox church to be built in the state of Vermont, which is the most anti-Christian state in America. So when I talk about these ideologies, yeah, it is. Come visit Vermont sometime for more than a week. If you look at the postcards and stuff, you'll see little covered bridges and red barns and maple syrup. That's all wonderful. A lot of darkness underneath. We have very, very aggressive abortion.
Vermont? Really?
Laws. Oh, absolutely. Just look at the Pew Research studies. They'll call it the least religious observance, which is just a euphemism for most anti-Christian. So, we have partial birth abortion here. We've got death tourism. We like local companies literally use symbols of the occult. There's an ice cream brand here now that's growing very fast, sort of like the new Ben and Jerry's, which is a Vermont brand, as you know. And their logo is an upside down pentagram, and it's made with ice cream cones, so it attracts children. Really spiritually dark stuff. We have the highest rate of adult drug use in the country. It is crazy. Yeah, it's a liberal bastion. It's one of the most, blue states, one of the most liberal states in America. And we have the highest rates of adult drug use. And once you introduce drugs, you're opening a portal to the devil in the mind. So when we were building St. Catherine, we had humongous, just tremendous pushback. It was a 10-year process to establish that community, a dozen lawsuits, and we still get hate mail from other business owners. We get threats. You go 45 minutes north over the Canadian border, and they just burned down churches. I think they burned down 75 churches in Canada in the last couple of years. You can look that up.
Oh yeah.
This part of the world just they really, and a lot of it is animosity towards the Catholic Church, but they don't know the difference. So to the extent that we're forming an Orthodox community in the Northern Kingdom of Vermont, they're unchurched people. They're pantheists, they're heathens, they worship trees, they build chapels to dogs, they do weird things. And so when they encounter a clergyman, they don't know the difference between Catholic or Orthodox. And they've got this idea in their mind, maybe partly true, that, the Catholic Church is widely, well, it is definitely true, and the Catholic Church widely abused children. But then the Canadian government went off the rails and, and sold this narrative that Catholic Christian missionaries in Canada were, forcefully converting the indigenous population and killing the children in their mass graves, and the society just bought it hook, line, and sinker without any evidence. So that's why they're burning down churches. They hate. We get the hate mail we get from prominent figures in Vermont just for building St. Catherine's is tremendous. So if you haven't seen St. Catherine's, you can look it up. It's we have a Facebook page with thousands of followers. It's a beautiful Byzantine chapel. It's really a light in the midst of the darkness. And so, when I talk about these issues of the culture, and it's really firsthand experience, and I consider it a privilege because I've not only had the privilege of serving around the world in the Orthodox Church, including in Greece, very often from the hospitals of Greece to the missionary churches in Hong Kong to the sort of confluence of Serbians and Romanians and Russians in Switzerland to the darkest place in America spiritually, starting a church. I feel so blessed to have seen all of these things. So when I speak from experience. It's not just theory. And it's really different. If you were to go south to Massachusetts, not far away, let's say 3 hours away, you've got so many immigrant populations still. You've got the Greeks and the Albanians and the Romanians, and you've got all these immigrants. Like there could be darkness in Massachusetts, and there is, there's witchcraft and all this other horrible Satan worship in Massachusetts, but it can't get that far because there's like 1 million Orthodox communities. Same thing in New Hampshire. Not so in Vermont. So when you say, it's almost like I think of the lives of St. Herman of Alaska or St. Innocent, who go and they encounter the indigenous people in Alaska, and they're starting from scratch. That's what it's like in Vermont. It's like starting from scratch. So I've seen it all, Yanni.
Well, God willingly, I say it all the time. I think Orthodoxy's biggest problem, even beyond financial, is exposure. I think as people find out about it, I think honestly, if you ask 7 out of 10 people in the United States what Orthodox Christianity is, they would have no idea.
That's right.
Um,
Yeah, that's right.
and
That might be
as
changing now, though,
yeah,
because
yeah,
it's getting some mainstream media coverage. The growth in the Orthodox community, New York Post, and so forth. A lot of other media outlets writing about it. Not always in a positive way, but it's getting it out there.
yeah. I think it's just starting to kind of ramp up in people learning about our existence. And I think once we kind of implant ourselves in the public consciousness of even being like a thing conceptually, I think after the people who come over to us just off of that premise are here after that, then there's some like substantial work to be done about like, what do we do about, our financial issues? How do we handle outreach? How do we combat, the narratives and the existent kind of, pseudo religions that exist in the United States and so on and so forth. I think
Yeah,
that's gonna come.
yeah, and the other jurisdictions like the OCA and the ROCR deserve a lot of credit for doing that. They're very proactive, and we as Greeks got a lot of work to do. I'll tell you, because we're still
Yeah.
too insular, in my opinion. It's all about the coffee hour, making sure our kids learn Greek, which is great. I mean, I think Greek is the most important language, but we gotta get out there because we have the oldest and richest tradition, and it needs to be front and center. And we got to start with accurate statistics. Our institutional church is putting out statistics that are just flat wrong. They talk about a million, 1.5 million faithful in America. That's just completely misguided. I mean, if you divide that by 550 parishes, just do the math. It's impossible.
What are you
So
talking
we are
about
very,
with our numbers of people that are Orthodox in America?
yeah, the faithful, the Greek faithful.
How many are there right now, do you think?
Well, if you have 550 parishes, just divide 1 million by 550. Do you think there's that many people in each parish? You think it's 20,000 people? It's a numerical impossibility. So we have a very small sliver of the population in America, 330 million. It's nowhere near a million. And we got to start there with good numbers that aren't, a fantasy. And I can tell you, every church I ever served in New England, usually they were, when I arrived, there'd just be a handful of people, not even 100. I mean, oftentimes much less than 20.
So you're saying even if we accounted for every inch of a pew being filled up, like, even
You
that would
could never
come
get to
close.
those numbers. No, you couldn't
Yeah.
get to those numbers. They're so like we're putting out numbers that are not real. And so we got to first get out of this like big fish in the small pond mentality. And like we've got to swim in the ocean. The ocean's America. It's the Western world. And like there's the discomfort in doing that, right? Like if we just stay in our little community, like we can kind of be a big fish. But if we realize that we're just in a pond and there's an ocean all around us, then we can start to engage with the world around us, in my opinion. So um, and that's where I think ROCOR has done a better job, and the OCA of engaging with the culture around it. And I would hope and pray that we as Greeks do a better job as well, starting with podcasts like yours.
Well, what I think there's a lot of people, particularly with this program, it's like, we're very niche. We do one thing really, really good, which is we interview priests and we give clergy and monastics an outlet to talk about their lives because I think it accomplishes a couple things. I think it gives like the clergy and the monastics an outlet to be able to voice like their experiences and what brought them to the point of their spiritual life that they're at, which they never really get the opportunity to talk about because really who asks ever? And people should, but the other thing is, I think once people realize that anybody watching this could be like you or could be like any of the other 80 clergy or these does that have been on here, that the spiritual life is something attainable with a closeness to Christ, and in that closeness to Christ they'll find their alternative out of the world that's crushing them. It's
Yeah, that's right. Of course, it's open to everybody. I mean, Christ's love is open to everyone. You just got to make a start and keep moving forward. And as I just want to say, looking back at, I was talking a little bit about the math and the numbers and stuff. As I said, We have about 550 clergy, I think. Maybe it actually might be more than that. It might be 600, 650 clergy, but I think we only have about 550 parishes in the Go Arch. So let's say roughly 10 parishes per state if they were evenly distributed. And like I said, I might have said 20,000, but I meant 2,000. How many even have 2,000 stewards or families? Maybe one or two, I don't know, a handful. But for the most part, we have this framework. We have a foothold in America. We've got a lot of work to do and a tremendous opportunity. And if we can speak the language of the people, I always say when you go into a country, you got to speak their language. Like when I lived in Germany, I very quickly learned to speak German. When I lived in Switzerland, I very quickly learned Italian. And when I was with the Romanians, I very quickly learned to liturgize in Romanian and to communicate with them. And I learned Albanian very quickly. And like we're in America, Greek is a beautiful, rich language, but we got to speak to the American people. We just have to about this beautiful treasure of the faith we have, because we're just nowhere near even a fraction of 1% of the population in America yet, the Greek Orthodox community. And with such a treasure of the faith, really the romance of faith, nothing richer, more complete than the Greek Orthodox Church. And you have all these people who are disenfranchised with the Catholic Church. Protestants, they don't even know what Christianity is. They think it's worshiping Israel or something. Most of them, they're dispensationalists. They're really it's just like a political movement with like a thin veneer of Christian nomenclature. But here stands the Orthodox Church, timeless and ancient and complete. We've got to speak to the culture. We really have to speak to them, because I think it would be a sin not to. The moment that becomes just for us, we're Pharisaic.
I agree. And as someone who, God willingly, still has a long time to work in the church, what are some things you think
I don't know. You should meet some of my enemies. They'll disagree with you. I think they got other plans.
I might be in that boat with you, but who knows?
I wish I could say it was a joke, but
well, God protects us.
indeed.
What do you think you'll see change about your work and your parish life and the things that you do in the future?
Well, only God knows. Yeah, I mean, my mother used to have this saying. She would say, "It's not how old your car is; it's how many miles are on the engine." So I often joke with people, "Oh, you're young, Father. You're only 40." I'm like, "Yeah, but I got a lot of miles on my engine."
Yeah.
I think a lot about what the future looks like. I mean, St. Catherine's is bursting at the seams. I continue to go back to Europe often, which I enjoy very much. They've got a whole different set of problems over there than we have in America. I long, though, to be there very often, especially Switzerland's like a second home. For the last 16 years, we've gone back and forth between the two countries. But as with that, and I and our children, were educated in Switzerland. So in terms of the future, I'm thinking very much about how you reach the largest number of people in the culture. And we started this nascent podcast a year and a half ago, but Presbytera and it was actually her idea. She deserves all the credit. I'm actually, if she wasn't involved in it, probably nobody would watch it. She's the star of the show. But if you haven't watched it, maybe watch a couple episodes. We recently did an episode on Charlie Kirk, and we try to tackle some of the darkest corners. I mean, the title of the show is the Father Emmanuel Lemelson podcast, but wouldn't let me put her name on it. She said, "It has to be your name." And the subtitle is The Darkest Corners of Government, Wall Street, and Culture. So we really tackle some of these darkest parts of our culture, and from an Orthodox Christian perspective. That's the subtitle, from an Orthodox Christian perspective. And like I said, it's the nascent podcast. We probably have maybe 10 to 20,000 views a week across platforms, but it's growing quite quickly. And I just think that if that's where the culture is at, if the young people are consuming online, we got to make sure that there's enough voices out there teaching and sharing the faith, if that's where the culture is going to be at. And maybe, that's a pretty effective way to do it. And with my background and building enterprises online and technology and so forth, it was kind of second nature. Although I wasn't really following podcasts before we started, never listened to them, but we're trying to, I'd like to think we're getting up to speed pretty quickly. It's a very visual podcast. So to the extent you do watch it, or your listeners watch it, it's quite unlike any other podcast visually, I think you'll find. And the handle on YouTube is at Lemelson, my last name, and it's the same handle on X and Facebook and so forth.
Yeah, please tell the audience everything that you do, anything you want to promote. Let us know what you're involved with, so people can reach out and check out your stuff.
Yeah, I really appreciate that. And yeah, I mean, to the extent people are interested in that topic, we cover a lot of different topics, and You can find us, like I said, pretty much on any social media. We're not hard to find. I think because it's a visual podcast, probably better to watch than to just listen. But we can't do it without the support of people like you and the listeners of your show. It's completely a non-commercial endeavor. In fact, almost everything I do is non-commercial. Like I said, my entire ministry as a priest, I never received a paycheck or a salary. St. Catherine's, we never solicited donations or anything like that. It's open to the public. Our podcast is not monetized. Everything we do is to evangelize and to, God willing, hopefully make a small but important impact on the culture and the society around us. So when people follow it, or if they get any benefit from it, they comment, they like, they share, it's hugely meaningful to us to know that. And if we have room for improvement, if we get criticism, that's great too. That's how we'll improve.
Glory be to God. Glory be to God. Father,
Yeah.
it has been such a joy to have you on today. Is there do you have any final thoughts for the audience?
Well, Yanni, the joy is all mine. And I can just say that I am so happy to see the next generation coming up behind me like you that are clearly going to make a positive impact. You're just so on the right track. And I commend you for, all the good work you're doing and the courage to live your faith and speak about it openly in a world that hasn't always invited that. So I'm really encouraged by the young people, especially the young men like you. And I'm just, glory be to God. I never thought I'd see it in my lifetime, this wave of orthodoxy, which I see coming. So glory be to God.
Look, there's better young people than me doing much more important work. I'm playing catch up in a lot of ways, but we're doing our best.
Άντε καλέ, λέγουμε άντε καλέ, τι
No,
λες,
no, no.
μη λες ψέματα.
Yeah. Father,
Right.
would you like to end us off with a prayer?
Absolutely. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit, Lord Jesus Christ, Son of the living God, we ask, pray, and entreat that you continue to bless this ministry of Yanni and the Orthochat podcast. We also ask, pray, and entreat that those who follow this show will come to understand the beauty and holiness of your church and will enter into it to a greater and greater degree, taking up their cross and following you in everything they do, in their lay vocations and in their participation in the community, so that your will be done. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen.
Amen. Father, thank you so much for coming on. And to everybody watching, we're back. It's been a little bit, been a couple of weeks. We've been, I've been dealing with a whole bunch of, little life things, just moving things over back to Greece. But in saying that, we got a lot coming up. We have our church documentaries that are going to come out. We are going to eventually, I promise, finish our series on the angels in the Orthodox Theology series. Our website should be released by the time you're seeing this, so go check that out. The link will be down below. The link to everything that Father Emmanuel does will also be down below, as well as ways to support him. Please help support him before you support our stuff. But if you still have some change left over, you can check out our affiliateships with Scriptorium Press and Lore Coffee Roasters and use our links and our codes to get products off of them and support us kind of on the side. There will be ways to donate to us down below, and we also have the Orthochat Passport coming up as well. You can find all of our stuff on RSS feed, Spotify, Apple Podcast, Amazon Music. Yeah, you can find us there as well. We're pretty much everywhere where you could find an audio or visual podcast, so please be sure to check those out. And there's some things that I can't mention that are in the works, but you guys will love them a lot. So anyway, in the meantime, may our Lord Jesus Christ, His all holy mother, all the angels, and all the saints be with you all the days of your lives, and we will talk to you all later.
Απολύας ως φύση ο Θείος μου Υιός, σιγάρ κατάγγισε όλες τη αμαρτία και παρεδόθης τελείως τη ραθυμία της εξαναστήσης εκείμενο.
Kyrie Iisus Christe eleison, 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 Kyrie Iisus Christe eleison.